Okay, so, and we'll send the link to the recording with the deck that Stella and Solange are going to go through. So look for that in a follow-up email. And then you guys, please feel free to ask questions anytime. You can put them into chat, and I'm going to monitor the chat to make sure they're answered. We'll try to leave some time for questions at the end, but I will tell you there's a lot of content to go through, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that. So just a little bit about ESA before we get started. For the past 7.5 years, we have partnered with ADP to build this executive community of nearly 3,000 participants in 20 cities, delivering world-class thought leadership and exposure to innovative technologies that are shaping the future of work. And we're unique in that we bring CHROs, CIOs, and other work tech executives together because we believe that they all have to be in lockstep with each other to deliver the kind of worker experience necessary to attract and retain talent. And finally, we offer a board positioning membership that provides many of the resources an executive needs to navigate to their perfect board seat, be it a private company board seat, public board seat, or even a startup board seat. So check it out on our website at executivestrategicalliance.com. We'd love to have you participate. I'm so honored to welcome Solange Charas back again. She and Stella's predictions for 2024 is what they're going to talk about. And these are the predictions for human capital leaders. Solange is a senior level human resources expert with 30 plus years of experience as a consultant, practice leader, top corporate executive, and board director across all industry sectors. She was the CHRO at Havas Worldwide, Benfield Group, and Praetorian Financial Services Group, and held senior level positions at Ernst & Young, Arthur Andersen, and Towers Watson. She's a distinguished principal research fellow with the Conference Board and is the founder and CEO of 2 organizations, Charas Consulting and HC Moneyball. Stella Lupushor is a thought leader, speaker, educator, and futurist on a mission to humanize the workplace. She's a senior fellow with the Conference Board, consults with clients on inclusive, digital, and data-driven workplace experience, and teaches at NYU the next generation of HR leaders. And together with Solange, co-authored Humanizing Human Capital, Invest in Your People for Optimal Business Returns. And finally, you guys, I'm so excited to have Bernadette Finken as our guest executive today. And Bernadette is an HR and digital analytics and technology leader for Best Buy. She's currently leading within a talent mobility assignment, providing strategic support to Best Buy's chief digital, analytics, and technology officer. And I've told her several times over the past couple of days, I'm envious of her new role. I think it's really awesome. Prior to this strategic assignment, Bernadette was head of talent acquisition for Best Buy, and she has more than 20 years of strategic human resources and technology experience, including leadership roles in HR technology, workforce administration, employee and labor relations, and talent acquisitions. She's a rock star, guys. So with that, I will turn it over to Solange. It's all yours.
Thank you, Cindy. Very excited to be here. Stella and I, at this point, go way back now. We do a lot of thought leadership. As Cindy said, we wrote the book, Humanizing Human Capital, Invest in Your People for Optimal Business Returns, which I hope you'll all check out. If you use the QR code, it'll take you to our website. You can buy it, the book, through any bookseller of your choice. So thank you for the opportunity of being here. And many of our predictions are actually grounded in some of the themes and some of the ideas in the book. So we wanted to spend some time and talk to you about the 4 big predictions that we had many more than 4, but we picked the 4 which we thought were the most interesting for this event. And we are thrilled to be joined by Bernadette, who will give us the practitioner's perspective of what's going on as it relates to our 4 big predictions. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the predictions, and we're going to give you some insight into why we think those events or those trends are going to emerge. So it's not just coming out of our, you know what, it's actually based in some type of informed perspective. And we're going to ask Bernadette to chime in to give us her point of view of what she's seeing from the practitioner side, from the corporate side. We also want to invite you to participate in the chat because sometimes the best ideas and the best points of views and the best experiences are from people in the audience. So we want to invite you to participate robustly in the group chat. I know that it's a little schizophrenic when you're trying to listen to a presentation and also participate in the chat, but our brains can do that. We're wired so that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And lastly, we want to thank Cindy and ESA for giving us this platform and giving us an opportunity to speak with you and hear you, because we're very interested in hearing what you have to say and what you're thinking. Because both Stella and I are a big user of generative AI, we want to give credit to DALL-E ChatGPT 4.0 for making us more productive in the work that we're doing so that we can do a lot of thought leadership. So Stella, you want to talk about the 4 predictions?
Absolutely. So we will go into each of them individually and get Bernadette's perspective. But at the high level, we will focus on 4 predictions. One is the fact that we will probably see a shift in the CHRO role holders, be that moving to new organizations, new companies, or new type of profile of CHRO emerging and taking the place of taking the roles. Second one is related to the integration of technology and AI into the workplace, into the workforce capabilities, into the workflow, and how that may impact jobs, occupations, the role of HR in that context. Third one is related to transparency around human capital metrics and all the disclosure requirements that are emerging, impending, and we see more companies embracing. And the role HR needs to play in helping organizations message it or choose the right type of analytics to disclose and implement policies to change workplace practices as a result of that. And then the last one, since we're in 2024, big year for election with a lot of risks and challenges, we also want to think about the impact on the workplace environment of all the chaos and interesting dynamics in the political arena on the workers' experience.
And before we get to the first prediction, which is I'm going to address, Cindy, do you want to talk about our timing? Because we had said that if we can't get through all the predictions, we want to do a part 2. So
yeah, let me just say that. Well, I always say, look, if we've got a lot of content and we've got great discussion, then we're not going to hurry through the agenda. We're gonna have a part 2, and we've done that with Marcus Buckingham, and we've done it with Christian Gomez. So if we don't get through all the 4 predictions, we'll come back with a part 2 in March. So please feel free to chime in and let's have a really great discussion.
Thank you. So Stella and I predict that we're going to see a lot of turnover, a lot of talent change, transition in the CHRO role. And the reason that we think that is because the world is different. So I'm going to ask for you guys to participate now. So just write in the chat, or if you feel comfortable turning off your mics and chiming in. What drove the transition in the CHRO during COVID? Now, we know that the CHRO role had the highest level of turnover of all the C-suite positions during COVID. I mean, that's not our point of view. That is actually fact. And we think that the turnover was because COVID actually created a shift or a change in the business model, right? We couldn't just go on business as normal because we had to make changes. Business wasn't normal. Workforce changes as well. So remote work versus essential workers, how do we deal with them? The relationship between employers and employees shifted as well. So the power structure changed a little bit. And we also saw a shift in the relationship between customers and companies, right? So companies had to find a different or a new way to actually service, provide customer needs or fulfill on customer needs in a different way. And what we think is that because this was such a human-centric change, right? The way we deal with employees, the way we do work, the way we deal with customers, that the Chief Human Resources Officer was the role that was most profoundly impacted by COVID. And what I'd love to hear is what you think in terms of skills that changed. So I'll start you off by saying a lot of CEOs said, oh my God, we need to be more agile in the way that we manage our business and manage our people. And we need CHROs who understand how to leverage agility in the workplace. So what do you guys, what are you thinking? What new needs did COVID generate that required replacing an old style CHRO with a new style CHRO? Anyone? Technology, remote work, right? Hybrid work, and all the policies around that, right? How do we manage managers managing people when they aren't co-located? And that is a different type of skill set. Motivating remote workers, resiliency and flexibility. I love that. HR is now seen as an advisor, which is the role we always wanted, and not just an administrator. So the role became very strategic. And we're talking to a self-selected room of HR people who are strategic, who are successful, who are enlightened. But think about the typical HR person. They don't really look like the people that are in this room. So that's what got shifted. That's what got changed. So what's happening in the world today that we think is going to drive a new type of CHRO that's going to be needed for 2024 and in the future? So the first thing that I think is going to create this huge change is another change to the business model, right? So during COVID, we had a change to the business model that was very customer service, customer centric. Like, how do we do business in a new world where people are on lockdown or people don't leave their homes? So instead of the customer coming to us, we have to go to the customer. This new business model change is super fundamental. And it's fundamental because in the past, human resources has been seen as a sunk cost, an expense, right? So we get a budget and we spend that budget, and that's a sunk cost. But there's this new sheriff in town, and this is the old sheriff, right? This is Jay Clayton, who started the ball rolling and said, you know what? Human capital isn't an expense. It is actually an investment in an intangible asset. And what he's saying here, just like you'd measure your physical capital, your intellectual property, and your financial capital, you have to start thinking about and measuring your human capital. It is a material risk. It is something that can move the needle on how well your organization performs. And what he also said is that we need a clear, comparable benchmarking, comparable and consistent disclosure on issues like talent management, diversity, and employee engagement, which are drivers of value creation for organizations. So he started the ball rolling, and this fundamental shift in the way we think about human capital in the organization is what's going to drive fundamentally, another fundamental word, the shift in the type of talent we need in C-suite executives. And the headline here is business acumen is going to be key. So Gary Gensler, who is now the current sheriff in town, says that the new rules around disclosure are going to include information about public companies or any filer, any SEC filer, so that's equity and debt filings, to require disclosure about the workforce, compensation policies, practices, workforce stability. So all of a sudden, what organizations used to hold close to the vest in terms of their human capital is now going to have to be disclosed. And who knows human capital better? Human capital professionals, not financial people, not your CFO, not your general counsel. It's the HR people who understand the impact of HR on organizations. So something else has happened, which I think is actually why we're seeing investors and governance monitors say, we have to understand human capital performance a whole lot better. And it's because over the last 30 years or so, the value of companies is now comprised mainly of intangible assets. So what the other thing that the SEC is saying is that human resources, human capital, is an intangible asset. So we make up part of that 90%. So this isn't just happening out of the blue. This is happening because human capital drives value creation, and the governance monitors and the investor community want to understand human capital performance a whole lot better to be able to predict and explain a company's market capitalization, their performance. So there's a context for understanding why these changes are happening. Next. And we'll go through this quickly. So in 2024, actually in April, we're anticipating that the SEC is going to come out with a list of disclosures that they are going to require all public companies to provide to the public. What their fundamental premise is that investments in human capital may result in competitive advantages for companies and generate long-term value similar to other investments in intangible assets. So that's the fundamental premise. And I think I have another slide that shows, okay, so I took out the slide that shows what the data is, we believe what they're going to be asking for. So I'm going to run through it really quickly. They're going to ask for workforce composition in terms of W-2 wage earners, right? Full-time, part-time, gig, seasonal worker, digital workers. So what goes into the labor input of your business model? The second is around diversity. So disclosures that you would make to the EEOC, you are now going to make to the public. The third is around retention and average tenure. So how good is the company at retaining employees, and how both short-term and long-term? So it shows stability. And the fourth, which for me is interesting because my MBA is in accounting and finance with a minor in taxation. So I'm all about the numbers and all about the finances. So the fourth thing that they're going to require is an auditable, aggregated line item entry into the profit and loss statement that shows the total cost of human capital, or the total cost of workforce for the organization. And today, companies don't have to disclose that. They can put some in cost of goods and some in SG&A and some in marketing and some in sales. And you never can tell how much a company is actually spending on people. That's going away. We're going to have full transparency. So as a human resources professional, as a human capital professional, we think that the new skills that are going to be required for a CHRO is business acumen. You have to know your business. You can't just know HR. You have to understand what business your company is in and what drives that business. So business acumen. You're going to have some financial literacy. You're going to have to understand what a balance sheet and an income statement is and human capital's role in that. And the third thing you're going to need is some level of data analytics expertise or data metrics so that you can take data from HR. And guess what? The HR function creates more data than any other function in the organization. You're going to have to learn how to harness, how to leverage that data to create your messages, your compelling messages about how human capital drives economic value creation. And today, there aren't a lot of CHROs that have all three competencies. So we think that we're going to see a lot of, opportunities for HR people that have those skills to step into those roles. And we also think that non-HR people are going to be asked to take on that CHRO role because they know the business, they're operators. And then they can build a staff underneath them of HR experts, but that top job needs to be a business person, needs to have that business acumen. The three skills again, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bernadette to give us some information about how she's seeing it, what she's seeing in the market, what's going on at Best Buy, what she's hearing from her cohort. The three skills are business acumen, financial literacy, data analytics competencies. So Bernadette, and I know I did a little bit of a monologue here, but tell us what you're thinking and how you're.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I've already learned a ton in the first 24 minutes. So, but we are very fortunate at Best Buy with our CHRO. She came from the business, although she did have a very strong HR background throughout her career. When we brought her into this role 5 years ago, she was leading our Canadian business. And so she moved from Canada to the United States to take on the CHRO role. And over the last 5 years, her role has expanded and shifted. At one point, she was also president of stores here in the US. At the moment, she owns HR, internal comms, external comms, PR, government affairs, and Canada. A huge job, huge job. But the benefit for her leaders, such as me, is constantly anchoring to the business. We are only in service of the business. So I'll give you a really great example that may make a few of us shiver, because I'll mention the Me Too resurgence of several years ago, right? And I think, with a traditional HR mindset, I was leading employee relations at the time. And so I think with the traditional HR mindset, I would have gone into a little conference room, figured out what was going on in the industry, put together, what's Best Buy going to do about it. But our CHRO said, nope, we're getting on an airplane and we're traveling all around the country and we're going to listen to the business and we're going to ask pointed questions. Is there opportunities at Best Buy in this space? If so, how big are those opportunities and what are we going to do about it? And so it was really through that deep listening and connection to the business that we built our plan for Best Buy on how to continue to eradicate harassment in all forms, right? And so I think that's just one example of how having that business first mindset can really come to life in the HR world. So, the second question, what are some of the trends we're seeing at Best Buy? Talent mobility to gain these experiences and these skills. So I'm a great example of that. So I've spent the last 10 years in HR. Prior to that, I actually grew up in the tech space at a software company. And I've always thought about possibly moving back into that tech space. So our chief digital analytics and technology officer asked me to come over for 6 months and help him from a strategic support perspective, and really help him get out of the weeds so he can continue to elevate himself and make a bigger impact on the company. So I'm gaining, regaining business skills. He's gaining some help, and it's a really, really cool gig. But that's just one example. So for example, I'll give you one other example. The way that our field operations are set up, we have 4 presidents. We split the country in 4, and we have 4 presidents responsible for those geographic areas. And when we've hired into those roles in the last 2 years, our leader has set the stage that he sees this as a 2 to 3 year gig, that in the field, back to corporate, in the field, back to corporate, like that talent mobility. So another great example is one of those presidents moved into HR. She's one of our senior vice presidents in HR, overseeing all the HR business partners. So that talent mobility and really getting comfortable with people shifting into very, very different spaces is helping us gain those skills and competencies that are really important.
And
Cool.
there's no better way to learn than do it on the job, and dealing with real
Exactly.
world issues and seeing how complex the business
Mhm.
environment and context is, and
Mhm.
building the empathy for what it's like to be on the ground.
Yeah, excellent. And everyone else in the audience, if you want to write in the chat, what you're seeing, what your experience is.
Yeah.
If you're like Bernadette, where you came from a function outside of HR and went into HR. I know, Cindy, that was your experience. And that's what, it's not scientific, but what I hear from CEOs is the best CHROs are the people who actually had business experience, who had line experience.
Yeah.
So, you're welcome to share your experience or ask questions in the chat. Stella, you want to take the second?
Going into the second one, it's more of a technical conversation, and as it relates to the workplace, right? So we've seen all of these fear-inducing, stress-inducing headlines about the generative AI and AI in general taking over the jobs, people being displaced, then people not being displaced by generative AI, but being displaced by people who know how to use generative AI, new skills, new occupations, new types of capabilities that are needed in the organization to integrate some of this technology, and then new risks that are emerging as a result of that. Obviously, this time it feels different just because the impact on knowledge worker is significantly bigger than previously technology had done. So obviously from HR, we need to start thinking, all right, what type of skill profile do we need to start building and developing? And we need to understand the vocabulary ourselves, what it means to train a model versus fine-tune a model versus have RAG models. All of the lingo that typically is left to the IT world now started to embed our day-to-day activities, just because it is one of those capabilities that makes work a lot more productive. And it's almost like a power tool that you may not necessarily understand the implications, consequences, and the impact, right? So being in the curious seat and understanding how things work, how the system processes the data, what type of data was used to train the algorithm, and being part of the conversation when certain decisions IT makes in terms of bringing some of this technology into the work environment is very important, because it will impact how we make decisions about the policies, the jobs impact, the skills development, the compensation impact, and all the other measurements that the HR cares about. The beautiful part about this type of technology is really the value it can bring. And yes, it will impact every single industry, pretty much, that has knowledge work, which is, to different degrees in different parts, but everyone can benefit as a result of utilizing some of this technology. The question is, do we know what type of questions we can answer, what type of business problems we can address with this type of technology. And is the technology ready, really mature enough to provide the value that we think it's being sold to us as if it's able to do. When we think about the jobs, yes, there will be significant number of jobs that will be outright displaced, and we will really need to think carefully about the precarity of people in those jobs and the transition to new occupations. And yes, there will be also jobs that will be created, but for the most part, majority of the jobs are going to experience tweaks and changes within the ability of making decisions or performing certain activities or automating certain tasks that were done previously either in a manual fashion or by very basic type of technology, or you needed somebody with very deep technical skills to do that work. So what would that profiles of jobs look like, and how might we start helping the business to rethink the workflow and how the work gets done? And it's not traditionally something that HR was part of that conversation, right? Typically, the business will define what the work needs to be done and how that translates into job description, and that's where HR will get involved. At this point in time, I think it's a lot more complex problem, and that's why that business acumen and understanding of the operational activities and steps is going to be important capability for HR to have to be part of this transformation. In a way, somebody was describing this as akin to the next new type of outsourcing, right? When we started offshoring certain capabilities to lower cost locations and destinations, it may be akin to similar type of transformation. Let's think what goes, what stays. Whereas I would call this, it's more of a co-pilot capabilities, right? You're not offshoring to another destination, which will create need for orchestration and reintegration of the work back. You have now the power to do the work and then ask your technology or co-pilot to generate an image or do the research for you. And then you have the control to assess whether the answer fits your needs and expectations, where it makes sense within the business context in which you work, whether it's maybe bringing facts that you feel skeptical about. So it leaves the judgment in your hand, and you don't have that extra cost of orchestrating the offshoring and reintegrating the results back into your workflow. So it's a very different type of power, but this requires you to know what type of questions you ask to be able to have that judgment call about the quality and the results that you're getting, and then being able to tell the story. So it becomes more important to have those business skills and capabilities to use the technology effectively. In essence, we're getting to an era of new general purpose technology. So if we think historically at the general purpose technology, such as textile loom that brought the world of industrial production, or electricity that enabled electrification of our lives and building of new devices and tools and equipment that helped our lives become better, easier, faster, warmer, all the outcomes of that. Then process automation that allowed us to streamline and routinize certain activities that then allowed us to create global scale and move work around the world to optimize the supply chain, to create lower centers of lower cost or faster production. We saw the digital revolution that enabled us to bring new products, new experiences to the customers so they can have more control over their decision-making, over the offerings that they choose, and creating personalized journeys for each of them. We are now entering that era where worker becomes that general purpose technology that helps transform customer experience, generate new products, create better skill, come up with new sources of value creation for the organization. So how might we create that worker experience such that it is enabled and not hindered, and it doesn't feel constraints in terms of the skills, the access to resources, and the abilities to be productive in this modern era? So the questions to all of you, and especially Bernadette, if we think about the HR departments, now that we have this superpower in a way at our disposal, and we can enhance the capabilities, we can give everyone a co-pilot to have the ability to be their best. What are the opportunities that we have to influence how this gets adopted? How do we make sure it doesn't just makes the challenges that we are dealing in the organization happen faster, and indeed is transforming the workplace experience for people? And then how can we, from a HR perspective, upskill ourselves to better understand and embrace this type of tool and really leverage the power it brings?
Great questions. So with the first question, from my perspective, I think AI is super powerful in providing insights and efficiencies from an HR perspective. Where I think we're not quite there yet is having it make decisions for you. So insights and efficiencies, some great examples of that include, an AI chatbot for our candidates to get answers to their questions. What's the status of my application? Who am I meeting with next? That type of thing. Or another great example is taking a job description and transforming it into a job advertisement, because they're two very different things. And let me tell you, recruiters hate writing job advertisements. They want to spend time talking to candidates, talking to hiring leaders. They don't feel like they're great writers, and we force them to take a job description and transform it into an advertisement. So AI has been amazing with that, with helping with that. Where we're not quite there yet is the decision making. And I don't know if or when or ever we want to get there. So I'll give you an example of that as well. Again, a lot of my examples are recruiting, because that was my most recent role. But a couple of years ago, we implemented video interviewing, especially for our high volume interviewing in the stores, where we can get thousands of applicants per job. And how do you weed through all these applicants when people meet expectations, right? So it's been fabulous from an efficiencies perspective and insights perspective, where we don't have to schedule all these phone screens, and it makes us much more efficient. But the holy grail of this technology ultimately is to predict who your very best candidates are and make that decision for you. So let's say you've got 500 applicants, 100 meet requirements. AI wants to tell us who those top 10 are from a prediction and from the smart algorithm they have behind the scenes. And we have not gone there yet, because as we do, impact analysis and make sure that we're not negatively impacting any certain population, we're not comfortable turning that on. So we are having our leaders and recruiters make those decisions. If there's 100 that meet requirements, you got to look at the 100 and determine yourself who stands out. Who are those top 10 that you're gonna offer interviews to? So that's kind of how I look at it. Insights and efficiencies versus making the decision for you is really how I think about it. So any questions on that, or I could go to the second question on upskilling. So around upskilling, HC technologies effectively, change management. This is a huge change. And I think we often, roll out this cool new stuff to the enterprise and forget that this is a big change for people to manage. And so, one of the things in my new role supporting our chief digital analytics and technology officer that I've been super impressed with. Every time he's working on a strategic AI initiative, he's got our change leader from HR with him, right beside him, saying, how are we going to build change plans for the enterprise to help our employees really embrace this big change? So I think change management and training that goes with that. And then I'll also underscore the talent mobility here as well. I think that's another great opportunity. I know over the last year, some of my recruiters who've expressed interest in HR technologies, we've given them the opportunity to take talent mobility assignments to upskill in real life responsibilities and roles. And I think that talent mobility continues to be my favorite way to upskill people and to give them the opportunity to learn new skills.
Absolutely. And I think the beauty of this type of technology, on one side, I think the capabilities feel akin to learning how to Google things, right? There was a time when people didn't know, and
Yeah.
now you do. So it's one of those basic fundamental skills that you must have as a human being interacting with technology, period, whether you're using it in the context of the work environment or outside of it. The second part is a lot of the capabilities are built not through sitting in the class necessarily. It's really about hands-on application and playing with it to really grasp the power and the challenges, the potential emerging challenges as a result of it. Because until you see this, interacting with ChatGPT or pick your model and getting some of the references to white papers that don't exist and saying, oh, that's what it means to hallucinate, or getting some of the opinions, but also being able to say, give me the answers in this type of format, change the style, make it more conversational. You realize that it's literally a matter of a sentence that you put there and give instructions that you have a very sort of output.
Or even skills. I know I've helped write like executive job postings, and it's like, I'm thinking of this skill, but it's not at that executive level. Help me. What's the word I'm looking for? And I love ChatGPT and other technologies for those type of questions too.
And
sorry, let me jump in for just a second. The interesting thing is that this is top of mind of students as well. So at University of Washington, I'm teaching a data analytics class. And 3 of the teams, I have 5 teams, 3 of the teams are studying generative AI. One is studying the impact of trust and the relationship between trust and usage. One is studying bias. So what they're doing is they're actually using different ChatGPT type software in different parts of the world. So one of their team members is in Singapore, and they're putting in the same question in the same and different software, programs to see whether or not there's bias based on the location, right? The IP address, based on the way the question is being asked. So is it asked as if it were a voice of a woman or the voice of a man, right? To see that there's bias in the way that ChatGPT or other Gen AI is answering those questions. So there's a lot of interest amongst the users, the main user group, which are the Gen Zs and the Gen Zs and the millennials, about this technology in terms of the kinds of utility that it gives people. So it's really fascinating to see how the young people are thinking about it and interacting with it.
It still feels so brand new. Like we're going to know so much more about this in 5 years. It's it's fascinating.
Solange, there's another question in chat. Do you see it?
Yep. The question is, how can human capital leaders ensure employee applicant private information is secure in light of open AI collecting user data through ChatGPT? So there are a couple of answers. I'm going to give mine, and then I'm going to let Stella answer because she's much more savvy on technology than I am. One is you can actually set up ChatGPT so that it doesn't take any of the things that you're entering into it and add it to the large language model. And most LLMs don't allow the input of user data into the LLM without some type of screening process. So number one, you can block it from your side. And actually, Stella was the one that showed me how to do that in ChatGPT. And the second is that there will be legislation around this. Come hell or high water, at some point, the government is going to step in and say, here are the rules. In New York State, we already have rules, especially for any generative AI or AI being used in the recruitment process. So if you are in New York, you have to make sure that you clear your AI approach with the state so that you can use it effectively. And I don't think it's proactive. I think you just have to make sure that there's no bias built in, because if there's an issue, the state's going to come after you. So I think we're going to see a lot more rules and regulations around it. Stella, what's your point of view?
Completely agree. I'll only add that there are ways to implement some of these models to make them, just think how we did the cloud implementation, right? You had public cloud, you have private cloud that you deploy for the internal company. Similarly, you can have a model that is deployed internally that only uses internal data and doesn't get exposed to the external training. And of course, this gets into, which model you choose, who do you go with? We see right now a couple of models emerging. If you look at the Microsoft, it already has a lot of the OpenAI models embedded in their products. So companies that already have a good Microsoft base deployed inside the company will be able to just buy that Copilot. And of course, Microsoft has its own way of walling off the data usage and complies with privacy, etc. So they know better the guardrails that are needed. And then, of course, you can experiment with some of the other emerging models like Anthropic, right? They created specifically a model that explicitly has a constitution that is by design intended to protect the data and mitigate the bias and all of the things that we're concerned about. So again, when it comes to the choices of the models that we use, it's up to us to either configure the system in a way that preserves the data or make the choices of the models that have that built in by design. Bernadette, anything from your perspective on this?
I mean, Best Buy is a pretty big company, but we have a whole team dedicated to this, to mitigating risks, to strengthening our defenses. We've got our strategy and our plan, and it will continue to evolve. We've got teams focused on that very heavily.
Hey, Bernadette, I have a question for you. You talked about mobility, and I am a huge advocate of this because of what I've seen from the former Enron employees. They talked about how that's what they loved about Enron. How do you, within Best Buy, create the culture and the ability for people to move around to get these new skills? How have you guys done that? Because that seems to be kind of the roadblock in a lot of cases, is that the culture has to promote that. How do you guys do it?
Well, that's a great question. And it's actually one that we're going to tackle even further this year. It's one of the top 3 priorities for the talent acquisition team, to really figure that out more programmatically. Because I will say we do it really well in pockets. It's nothing formal. It's not a program. And if leaders are passionate about it, then it happens. And if leaders are not passionate about it and don't want to share their talent, then it doesn't happen. And so, right now it's more inspired by leaders than it is something programmatic. This year in our strategy and plans, it's going to be more programmatic. We have a working team working on it. But yeah, it's very leader by leader at the moment.
Thank you.
So should we try to go to the next prediction?
We have 10 minutes. And so if you want to jump into the next prediction, and then we might have to cut it off. And then part 2 is the rest of that. And the last prediction.
Sounds good.
Okay, so it's back to me. So we're not going to get through it in 10 minutes because
No, that's
not too much. This idea of increased transparency, especially in human capital and human capital reporting, has been a trend that has started many, many years ago, like a couple of decades ago, but got pretty accelerated, probably in the mid, to 2015 or so. And there's so much around this idea of transparency and how transparency actually enhances or amplifies sustainable business outcomes. I think McKinsey just did a report on transparency that they released a couple of days ago, saying that their research shows that the more transparent an organization is, the better it performs. It is the underlying principle in the ISO standards, so the International Standardization Organization standards. So this idea of increased transparency shouldn't really surprise anybody. Stella, if you go to the next slide, please. I gave you a little bit of a timeline regarding some of the big events that have happened related to human capital disclosures. I start at 2015 because it's just arbitrary. I could have gone back further, but the United Nations came out with a statement about human capital development and well-being needs to be disclosed. Basically, it's a human rights issue. And then 2017 was a real milestone event when the Human Capital Management Coalition that have at this point about $8 trillion of assets under management petitioned the SEC, petitioned Jay Clayton to require that companies disclose human capital information. And their point of view was, if we don't understand human capital management, we as fiduciaries cannot responsibly invest in companies. And that basically started the ball rolling. In 2018, the International Standardization Organization 3414 standard was introduced, and the 3414 standard is human capital governance and disclosures. And then you see a whole bunch of acceleration of things happening. 2019, the Business Roundtable and the World Economic Forum come out with their stakeholder capitalism approach. 2020, we had the SEC basically say human capital is not an expense, it's an investment in an intangible asset. When you use the word investment, it automatically generates the concept of return. So we have to start thinking about how are our investments in human capital actually creating value for our stakeholders. The CSRD in Europe introduced the ESRS standards, which got approved in December and are now in effect. That's the good news. The bad news is they basically put a 2-year lag on reporting. So the large companies under the CSRD would have to have reported on all ESRS standards, and there's 10 of them, starting in January of 2025. And then mid-sized companies, the July of 2025, and small cap companies, January of 2026. And they basically built in a 2-year lead time to that. So we bought a little breathing space. And then 2020, we started updating the 3414 standard, and now in April, we're going to see the SEC come out with its disclosure standards. So if you think human capital disclosures is going to go away, it's not going to go away. It's here. The fundamental, Stella, the next slide, please. The fundamental premise, again, you've heard me say this, I think maybe 3 times now, so you're going to hear it a 4th time, that HR is not simply an expense. That's the past orientation, where HR leaders simply need to manage their budgets. The future orientation is that HR investments are, HR is actually an investment in an intangible asset that requires a return. And HR leaders are going to need a new vocabulary to speak to that, be able to transform human capital performance into financial outcomes, and also report on that. And if I can give you a little word of advice as HR professionals, do not cede this to your CFOs or your GCs. Do not let them take your power away. This is your expertise. So instead of being afraid of it, embrace it, hold on to it, and get a seat at the table. We're going to need a new vocabulary, and we'll provide all the explanation of what the letters mean, and also the algorithms to be able to calculate them. So the ISO is calling for standard algorithms to calculate these values. It's not a black box. We don't want it to be a black box. We want companies to be consistent in the way that they calculate it. So we put them out there. We want the world to know what these algorithms are. And if you work with any consultants who say, I've got a black box or I've got my own proprietary way of calculating, don't work with them, please. That's not in the spirit of what the standard is about what stakeholder capital is about. So we want transparency. And the idea is to shift managing programs from HR KPIs to supporting business KPIs. And that's why we need HR people to have business acumen. It's not just that you understand the business, it's that you are able to take your HR performance data and show how it supports the business in financial performance, right? Or market share or NPS or whatever it is that your company measures as its outcome. You need to learn, the profession needs to learn how to speak this language. And the way that I think about it is that these indicators, these metrics, these human capital metrics are really like a Rosetta Stone. It's taking HR data, which used to be very subjective and qualitative in nature, and it transforms it into something that's objective and quantitative in nature that then we can correlate to other things that are happening in the organization, like market share, like profitability, like return on assets or return on equity. So I think that's why we need this skill in the HR group.
So Solange, I think we're at time. I will just say this as you're talking, I'm thinking a lot of people on this call already are doing some of these things. I guarantee you, because we've got an amazing network of unbelievable CHROs and CIOs. Let's do a part 2. Let's start with this one. I would love to have a couple more guest executives to with Bernadette to come back and talk about what they're already doing in this area. And then we can touch on the last prediction and have a discussion around that. So with that, I really appreciate you guys. Stella, Solange, Bernadette, you guys were all amazing. And thanks for being here, you guys. I really appreciate it. And Mike Pino, your notes in the chat were amazing. I will include all of those so that you guys can go back and reference the stuff that Mike was giving everyone. Okay? So talk to you later, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
See y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good job.
Thank you. It was great.
Bye.